And when I say random, I mean random. You see, up until this point, I considered myself an atheist. I had conversations with him and one of my best friends about how there's just no way that there's this God out there. My ignorance rationalized the lie by saying things like, if there was a God, then babies wouldn't have been used as target practice in the Holocaust, or if there was a God, then bodies would have been chopped up and thrown into the river. And I finally say, if there was a God, then he would have known how much I love my grandma Minnie, and he would not have let her die so soon. Can we say ignorance at its finest? I apologize even now to the Lord for ever questioning his sovereignty. I remember a conversation in particular with one of my best friends, Jorinda, in the HU cafeteria, and I was just trying to explain to her how there's just no way that God is real.
Hi, my name is Jorinda Manley, and I'm one of Juanita's besties. I remember when we had a conversation one day back at Hampton University in the caf. We always used to meet to eat there and have dinner. Every Wednesday they had fried chicken, so that was our little meat throughout the week. And I remember I was having a conversation with her about like God's grace and how I felt like I didn't understand how I made it through certain situations. And I just felt like God had stepped in and covered me and allowed me to make it through. And I remember while I was talking to her, she kind of just had like a blank stare in her eyes as if she didn't understand what I was talking about. So I remember I asked her, have you ever had a situation like this? And she responded, no. She went on to tell me that she had a very close relationship with her grandmother, and her grandmother had passed away a few years back. And she questioned, how could it be a God if God took my grandmother that I love so much away from me, and why did he allow her to go through so much pain and suffering? And she went on to say that she felt like, she was an atheist.
So finally I made my way through the sand to the water and just randomly began screaming up towards the sky. I yelled, God, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I just want to live for you, God. Please, just let me live for you. And this was my first encounter with the Most High. While I said that, I could barely see because so many tears were falling from my eyes. I felt so deeply depressed, and it was just pretty pitiful. But immediately after my last sentence, joy literally overwhelmed me. I can't even begin to describe it, but turn my frown upside down is an understatement, okay? And between me looking up into the sky, yelling and crying, to bringing my head back down to eye level, I began smiling so hard that I started laughing aloud. It was like in that moment, nothing else mattered. Despite the fact that I had been crying for probably the last hour or so and didn't see any hope in my current situation, God surrounded me with his peace and joy. It was amazing. After literally laughing for a few minutes aloud, just standing in the sand, I literally turned around and skipped back home. What about people think I'm crazy? And I'm talking about that 5-year-old little girl skip after getting a new doll and some ice cream. Like, the tears were all gone, and I literally laughed and skipped all the way back home. This was all in a matter of about 10 minutes from me leaving the apartment, crying and sobbing, to going back, skipping and laughing. So if anyone saw me from beginning to end, such that drastic transformation, they would have been looking like, this fool crazy. And a lot of my friends and family did say and believe that with all of their little hearts, but I love y'all. Back to the point. So I skipped home and galloped into the apartment with the joy of Jesus. At this point, I had no clue who Jesus was, but that's not the point. I walked in humming a song that I hadn't heard in over 10 years, but within the last week, it played on the radio every time that I got into the car. And it was India Arie's video. Love that song. So with a little pep in my step, acting, but not acting, as if nothing ever happened between he and I walked into the room where he was and just asked something random like, do you want to go find an exotic recipe and go get the ingredients and make dinner together? He just looked up at me, rolled his eyes, and that was that. So I said, alrighty then, and just started cleaning up. So some of this may seem pretty random, but the purpose is to show you who he was becoming over time. So there I was cleaning up in our closet, and I peeked my head out to randomly ask, you want to go to church? It was like 8 p.m. on a Tuesday, so I don't know. I had never suggested church before, and I don't know why I asked him when I did. It was just so random. But he just looked at me and looked up and just kept doing what he was doing. So I left the room, kind of shrugged it off, and then went to the kitchen and started washing dishes. You should have seen me in there with that little plate. I only had one plate to wash and I was going to town with that little plate. I was rubbing it like really fast in a circular motion, dancing like I was trying to win a competition, and singing at the top of my lungs. Don't need your silicone, I prefer my own. What God gave me is just fine. And it was just funny because for like, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes, I just kept repeating this part over and over and over and over again. Just what God gave me, what God gave me, what God gave me is just fine. I'm still praying for my singing voice, y'all. Y'all pray with me. But anyway, I probably repeated that like 20, 30 times before old boy's choice language interrupted by telling me to shut the you know what up. So by this time, this man had repeatedly told me how I wasn't attractive, I needed implants and whatever else. So I just kind of laugh at God for the fact that he, I believe, you know, had me saying these particular words while I still wasn't even sure that he even existed. You know, he had such a great sense of humor, but I had just went to the beach 20 minutes before that, depressed and all sad, and then I go and randomly have this conversation with him and then come back home to the apartment just with joy, singing, you know, randomly. And then the words that I just kept repeating was, you know, how I don't need all the things that he had just got done saying that I needed. But anyway, so I granted his request and stopped singing. And then I marched into the room, grabbed my purse and said, boy, I don't know what's wrong with you, but I'll be back. I was leaving to go grocery shopping at Walmart. So keep in mind, all of this from me weeping my way to the beach and then leaving to go to Walmart took place all within about 25 minutes. So once I got to Walmart, the first thing I noticed was a woman who would have had to been at least 80 years old. She just watched me as I grabbed my cart and she just smiled. So I smiled back, of course, as I put my little headphones in preparation to walk every square foot of that place, just in my attempt to get away for a while. So once I finished my walk, I walked around for about an hour and a half. I made my way to aisle 3 for a pack of rice. My music was still blasting in my ears as I reached for the rice, and that little woman that I had seen earlier who was you know, smiling when I first walked in, she just started walking to me speaking, but I didn't know she was talking to me, so I was kind of just grabbing my rice and doing that little phony smile and, you know, about to go about my business. And she upon realizing that she was speaking to me, I took one of the headphones out to listen, and she just kept saying, humble yourself. You have to humble yourself. Just humble yourself. She just kept saying it. And can I be honest, I had no clue what humble even meant. But I shook my head for affirmation and said, yes ma'am, gotta humble yourself. Then she stepped back and she put her hands on her little tiny hips and she was just like, God is shining a light so bright through you and you don't even know it. You gotta humble yourself. Sorry y'all. So I immediately began to cry and I snatched the other earphone out of my head and I said, ma'am, you don't know how much that means to me. You see, I just had my first conversation with God like 20 minutes ago. It had probably been about 2 hours since then, but I wasn't thinking about technicalities at the time. So I continued to say, you are the first person in my whole life to ever say anything to me about God. And I just got done talking to him. Oh my God, there is a God. I know there is. And you can just cut it off, babe. So she just continuously repeated, humble yourself, humble yourself. Like I said, I had no clue what humble meant. But fast forwarding now, in the middle of our conversation, the lady and I, old boy called. I didn't say hello. I just answered, you know, slid the thing over to answer the phone. But I didn't say anything. I just let him listen. So after having my conversation with the lady, I called him back, like so excited that I could barely talk. But of course, in the middle of me explaining, he hung up. So I paid for the groceries and quickly returned home. I was still very overwhelmed with excitement about my conversation with the little old lady. You know, still with no real understanding, but nevertheless, you know, I was excited. So I went into the room to where he was and started yakking his ear off about how it's time that we live for God, give our lives to him. I didn't know what I was talking about. He briefly had like a moment of gentleness, if that's what you want to call it. It was the first time in months, and he was just like, in the midst of me saying that, like, we gotta live for God, you know, he was like, yeah, I used to want to live for God, you know, be a soldier in his army. That's why I got this tattoo of this cross with the sun rays coming out of it and these angel wings on my neck. So I just sat there listening. And then when he had pointed at the cross on his arm, he lifted his sleeves up to show me, like, as he was saying it. And then after his last word, he was like, that's why I got this cross and these angel wings on my neck. He's like, but that was then, you know, and then he like pushed it back down. He boldly proclaimed, you know, that was then. He ain't trying to do that now, but he didn't elaborate. He just said that was then. As he abruptly pulled his sleeve down to cover the tattoo. And mind you, by this time, he had already been instructed to cover the cross. It's just amazing how God revealed all this stuff later on. Like, I didn't know this at the time, but by that time when we had that conversation, his tattoo it had black clouds all around it, and raindrops surrounding the clouds. Then more clouds at the bottom to cover up the original words of the tattoo that read God's Son. So anyway, right after this conversation, the phone rang, and it was his mom. They had only spoken like once or twice in the 5 to 6 years that I dated him, but nevertheless it was her. So he walked into the closet to talk, and shortly after he was crying. I had only seen him cry once before, but anyways, all I could hear was his mom saying, you got to give it to God, baby, you got to give this to God, you know. And then I didn't hear any of the rest of the conversation. But right after he hung up, one of his friends called, and this is a friend that he was friends with for years, but for whatever reason he had been ignoring his calls for the last year or so. And later I learned that he was kind of sharing with that friend the things that he'd been learning about the Illuminati and Masonry and selling his soul, all that kind of stuff. And the friend wasn't trying to hear. They were kind of trying to persuade him to, you know, not be involved with that kind of thing. So, and he wasn't trying to hear that. So he had ignored his phone calls for a year. But anyway, I see it as no coincidence that in one night, his estranged mother, you know, long lost best friend and quote unquote atheistic girlfriend all tried to somewhat persuade him towards God. Almost like, you know, God was trying to speak to him to give him a chance to turn from his decision and trying to let him know that regardless, he was still with them, you know. That's just my assumption. But either way, his mind was made up. He made comments often within those last 6 months about devil worshiping and fortune and fame, but never to the extent to where I believe that he was in the initiation process. Other than that time when he asked me what I thought about it on the phone, and I had told him, you know where I'm at with it. If you think it could work, go for it. But somehow I forgot all about that. And then there were other times, like there was a time when we were watching BET, and he saw that 2 new rappers had successfully crossed over, you know, like sold their soul and became whatever it is that they are. And we were sitting there, I didn't get it at the time, but he just kind of like jumped up for joy when he had saw them on there and repping their eye symbols and triangles, all that kind of mess. And he was just like, man, see, if they can do it, I can do this too, man. You know, then he just looked down at me and he smirked and like chuckled as he walked off the room. He just looked down like, yeah, and just walked out the room and started writing rhymes or whatever he was doing, you know. And I didn't get it. I didn't know what was going on. It's so ignorant.
The fight goes on. Only God can get straight for me to fight this long. Lord, it hurt for me to write this song. Yet still I'm stuck in the